The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet stretch of Highway 46 when everything in Adrian Holt's life shattered like thin glass beneath the weight of fate. Moments earlier, the road had been empty, washed in soft gold, calm as a painting. But then a scream tore through the morning, the sharp, desperate cry of someone whose world had just collapsed. Lying on the side of the road, trembling and unable to move her legs, was a woman in an immaculate white suit now smudged with dust and fear. Her luxury car lay tilted in a shallow ditch, smoke rising lazily from the hood. The words broke from her throat in a trembling gasp, "I can't walk." And in that instant, Adrian, a humble mechanic on his way to open his small, struggling workshop, had no idea that helping her would end up changing not only her life but his own in ways he never believed possible. If you believe kindness and second chances can change the world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts. Adrian halted his old pickup so abruptly the tires screeched. The world around him fell silent except for the quickening thud in his chest. He rushed to the woman's side, noticing how her breaths were shallow, her face pale under the morning light, her hands shaking as she tried to pull herself upright. He didn't know she was one of the state's youngest millionaires, Serena Vale, known for her thriving tech empire and polished, untouchable public image. All he saw was a human being in pain. He spoke gently as he knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders and reassuring her even as she kept whispering that she couldn't move her legs. Her fear soaked the air like cold rain. He carried her as carefully as he could to his truck, every movement measured, praying silently that he wasn't making things worse. She gritted her teeth, trying to hide her cries, but pain forced itself through. Only minutes later, he was racing toward the nearest hospital, every bump in the road tormenting her injured legs. The journey felt painfully long, though it lasted barely 15 minutes. When they arrived, nurses rushed out with a stretcher, their voices echoing through the rotating doors, and Adrian felt her hand slip from his arm as she was pulled into the sterile, white corridors. Watching the doors swing shut behind her left him with an unfamiliar ache of worry. He wanted to leave, this wasn't really his place, he thought, but something anchored him. Maybe the desperate way she had looked at him. Maybe the way her voice trembled, stripped of all power and pride. Maybe the simple fact that no one else had been there for her. So he waited in the uneasy silence of the hospital lobby, tapping his worn boots on the floor, feeling out of place among the polished marble and hushed conversations. Hours passed, but leaving didn't feel right. He had found her alone, he wouldn't let her wake up alone. When a doctor finally approached, Adrian felt a weight settle in his stomach. The verdict was troubling though not hopeless. Serena had suffered severe spinal shock from the crash, making her temporarily unable to walk. With time, therapy, and rest, she might recover fully, but nothing was guaranteed. When she woke and saw him at her bedside, confusion clouded her features, followed by gratitude she was too exhausted to voice fully. She simply stared at him through eyes rimmed with pain and something else, something like disbelief that a stranger had stayed. As the daylight poured through the hospital windows, Serena's story began to unfold piece by piece. She admitted she had been driving too fast, anger clouding her mind from a boardroom betrayal the night before. Someone she trusted had tried to wrest control of her company, and in her fury and heartbreak, she hadn't seen the patch of gravel that sent her car off the road. Adrian listened quietly. He wasn't used to the world she belonged to, the sharp suits, the endless meetings, the weight of money. His life was simple, hands stained with grease, bills stacked on his kitchen table, dreams growing dusty on a shelf. Yet something about her vulnerability made him stay long after he promised himself he wouldn't. Over the next few days, Serena found herself relying on Adrian more than she expected. Her assistants and board members visited with polished concern but never stayed long. They brought briefcases instead of comfort, questions about contracts instead of warm words. Adrian, on the other hand, arrived with fresh flowers from the roadside, homemade sandwiches wrapped in foil, quiet company, and a sincerity she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know how to accept kindness without suspicion. Her life had taught her that kindness often came with hidden price tags. But Adrian didn't want anything. Not money. Not status. Not promises. Just to help her recovery journey was slow, each day a battle between hope and dread. Some mornings she could twitch her toes, other mornings she felt nothing at all. On those days she cried silently, hating the helplessness that replaced her confidence. But Adrian always encouraged her gently, his calmness a counterweight to her panicked thoughts. He would sit beside her as physical therapists worked with her, learning the exercises so he could help her continue them later. He never treated her like a fragile relic or a wealthy prize, just a human being, and Serena, for the first time in years, wondered who she was outside her empire. In Adrian's quiet presence, she let herself feel simple things again: the warmth of sunlight on her face as he wheeled her outside, the comfort of someone who didn't expect perfection, the strange joy of laughter shared over stories from his workshop. He told her about fixing old engines, about customers who paid late, about nights he spent tinkering on projects he loved even though the world rarely noticed his work. She admired his perseverance, his willingness to keep going despite hardship. It reminded her of the values she had once held close, long before success turned her world into a battlefield. As days turned to weeks, something fragile but strong began to grow between them, something Serena didn't know how to name. She felt safe in a way she hadn't felt in years, as though the wall she had built around herself had finally cracked open. Adrian felt it too, though he didn't dare acknowledge it. She lived in a different universe. He was just a mechanic with an aging truck and a heart too easily bruised. So he swallowed the warmth he felt whenever she smiled at him. Then came the night everything shifted. Serena had attempted a new set of walking exercises, determined to show progress. But exhaustion took over halfway through, and she collapsed in frustration. Adrian rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Her tears soaked into his shirt, her voice trembling as she said she was tired of being broken. She confessed that her fear wasn't just about walking, it was the fear of losing herself, losing control, losing the identity she had constructed so fiercely. In that quiet, vulnerable moment, Adrian held her gently and reminded her that brokenness didn't define a person, it revealed who stood beside them the next morning. Something lit within her. She pushed harder through her therapy, driven not by pressure to return to the corporate world but by the hope of reclaiming her life. Adrian saw the fire in her eyes returning, softer this time, more human. And it inspired him as well. He realized he had spent years shrinking his own dreams, believing they were too small to matter. Serena, even in her struggle, reminded him that change was possible for anyone brave enough to try. One afternoon, after 6 long weeks, Serena finally stood without support. Her legs trembled, pain prickled like fire, but she stayed upright. Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked at Adrian standing just a few steps away, his expression holding the pride of someone who had witnessed the entire journey from despair to triumph. She took her first tentative step toward him, then another. When she fell into his arms, laughter and tears mingled in a raw, powerful release of emotion. Recovery, however, didn't mean the end of her battles. Returning to her company felt like returning to a storm. Rumors had spread about her accident, and several executives were pushing for her removal. But this time, she didn't walk into the boardroom armed with cold fire. She carried warmth, strength, and the hard-earned knowledge that life was too fragile to waste on battles that didn't matter. She calmly restructured her leadership team, removed those who had betrayed her, and rebuilt her company with a new vision, one centered on empathy, respect, and purpose. Through it all, Adrian remained by her side. Serena invited him to her world not as an ornament but as a grounding force. They walked together through charity events, business galas, and community workshops, and though their differences were vast, their connection was undeniable. And slowly, the lines between their two worlds blurred until neither of them remembered where one ended and the other began. As the sun set on a warm evening months after the accident, Serena found herself standing on her heeled legs beside Adrian on the edge of a quiet lake. She reflected on how a single moment, a scream on the roadside, had rewritten her entire life. She realized she didn't just regain her ability to walk, she had regained her ability to feel, to trust, to love, to start again. For Adrian, witnessing her transformation awakened something equally powerful, the belief that his simple life held extraordinary worth, that kindness was a currency more valuable than wealth. Victoria, once the iron-willed millionaire, had become Serena, the woman who understood the power of vulnerability. And Adrian, once the unnoticed mechanic, had become the man who reminded her tea